You open your electricity bill, and for a few seconds, you just stare at the number. You know you didn't use more power. Nothing changed in your routine. No new appliances, no extra heating, no crazy air conditioning. And yet, the bill is higher. Again. At first you think it's a mistake. Then you remember. It's been happening every month. You start asking yourself questions that no one seems able to answer. Why is this going up? Even when I'm careful. Why does it feel like no matter what I do, the cost keeps rising? And why does no one ever explain this clearly? They'll tell you it's inflation. They'll blame the weather. They'll mention global events, fuel prices, or vague adjustments. But deep down, something doesn't sit right. Because this isn't just about a higher bill. It's about losing control over something your home depends on every single day. Electricity isn't a luxury. It's not optional. And yet, it's starting to feel like a system you're trapped inside, with no real way out. And here's the uncomfortable truth most people never hear. If you don't understand why your electricity bill keeps going up, you'll never be able to protect yourself from what's coming next. Here's what usually happens next. You try to understand it logically. You go online. You read articles. You hear experts on the news explaining that energy prices are rising because of inflation, supply chain disruptions, fuel shortages, geopolitical tensions, extreme weather, infrastructure, upgrades. And yes, all of that plays a role. But here's the problem. Even when those factors stabilize, your bill rarely goes back down. That's the part almost no one talks about. Temporary crises seem to create permanent increases. Energy companies adjust rates temporarily. Regulatory bodies approve new charges. New fees quietly appear on your bill. Delivery fees, service fees, adjustment clauses, environmental surcharges. Individually, they don't look dramatic. But collectively, they compound. And because electricity is essential, you don't really have the option to say no. You can reduce usage, you can turn off lights, you can upgrade to efficient appliances, you can lower your thermostat in winter or raise it in summer. But even when you do everything right, the baseline keeps shifting. It's not just about how much electricity you consume anymore. It's about how the system itself is structured. In many regions, power generation is centralized. Distribution is controlled by a small number of providers. Infrastructure upgrades are funded by rate increases. Grid modernization costs get passed to consumers. Renewable transitions, capacity expansions, maintenance costs, all of it eventually shows up on one line, your bill. And because the system is complex, most homeowners never truly see how it works. They just see the result, a number that keeps climbing. This isn't about panic, it's about clarity. When something is essential, centralized, and constantly becoming more expensive, the real question isn't just, why is my bill higher? The real question is, how exposed am I to a system I don't control? Most people only think about the power grid when the lights go out. But the truth is, the system is under pressure long before that happens. The electrical grid most homes depend on was designed decades ago for a very different world. Back then, demand was lower, energy use was more predictable, and households relied on far fewer electric devices than they do today. Now, everything runs on electricity. Heating systems, cooling systems, cooking, communication, work, security, medical devices. Even transportation is becoming electric. At the same time, the grid is being asked to do more with aging infrastructure. Extreme weather events are more frequent. Heat waves push demand to the limit. Cold snaps strain generation capacity. Storms damage transmission lines. Wildfires force shutdowns. Cybersecurity has become a real concern. Maintenance backlogs keep growing. None of this means the grid is about to collapse tomorrow. But it does mean the margin for error is getting thinner. That's why outages that used to be rare are becoming more common in certain regions. Short blackouts, rolling outages, temporary service interruptions that last longer than expected. And every time something like this happens, the response is usually the same. Rates go up to fund upgrades. Fees increase to support resilience projects. Consumers pay more to stabilize a system they still don't control. For most homeowners, this creates a quiet but uncomfortable realization. Your home depends on a system that is becoming more complex, more expensive, and more fragile at the same time. And when something goes wrong, there's very little you can do in the moment. You wait. That's when people start asking a different kind of question. Not, how do I lower my bill this month? But how dependent do I really want to be? As electricity costs continue to rise and grid instability becomes more visible, a growing number of homeowners are starting to think differently. Instead of focusing only on short-term savings or trying to guess what the next rate increase will be, they begin asking broader questions about control, resilience, and long-term exposure. This shift is not driven by panic or ideology. It is driven by practicality. People are realizing that relying entirely on a centralized system leaves them vulnerable, especially when that system becomes more expensive and less predictable over time. For some, this means learning how energy actually works at a basic level, understanding where electricity comes from, how it is distributed, and why certain costs keep increasing. For others, it means exploring ways to reduce their dependence on the grid, even if only partially. Not to disconnect completely, but to create options. What's important here is the mindset change. Instead of asking how to beat the system, the focus becomes how to understand it and work around its limitations. That often leads people to look into alternative approaches, backup strategies, or hybrid solutions that can increase flexibility without unrealistic expectations. This is not about installing expensive equipment overnight or chasing complicated technical setups. For most people, the first step is simply education. Knowing what alternatives exist, what is realistic for a typical home, and what trade-offs are involved. When homeowners understand the system, they stop feeling powerless. They may still be connected to the grid, but they are no longer completely dependent on it in the same way. And that sense of agency changes how they approach rising costs and future uncertainty. At some point, most people reach a simple conclusion. Complaining about rising electricity bills doesn't change anything, and blindly trusting that the system will somehow stabilize on its own feels increasingly unrealistic. What actually makes a difference is understanding how the system works and knowing what options exist beyond doing nothing. That's why many homeowners start looking for deeper explanations. Not quick tips, not gimmicks, and definitely not miracle solutions, but structured information that breaks down how energy systems work and what practical alternatives are available for ordinary homes. This kind of knowledge doesn't eliminate every problem, but it reduces uncertainty and helps people make better decisions over time. If you are someone who wants to understand why electricity costs keep rising, how grid dependency affects your home, and what realistic paths exist to reduce that dependence, then learning more is a reasonable next step. Not because it guarantees a specific outcome, but because staying uninformed guarantees one thing: continued reliance on a system you don't control. I've come across educational material that goes much deeper into this topic, explaining alternative approaches to energy use and ways homeowners can think differently about their relationship with the grid. It's not something everyone needs, and it's not a replacement for the grid itself, but for people who want clarity instead of confusion, it can be useful. If you're curious to explore that perspective further, I've left a link in the comments. Take a look if it feels relevant to your situation. No pressure, no promises, just information for those who want to understand their options better. Because when it comes to something as essential as electricity, awareness is often the first step toward independence.